This is Mike Johnson up in Sacramento. I appreciate everybody coming back for the continuation of this risk discussion. I still see a number of people coming in the meeting, so I'll just do a couple of quick announcements, and then hopefully we'll kind of stabilize. First and foremost, today we're going to be going into breakout sessions later on in the workshop. So this is the first time that we will have done this with this big group. And to make that possible, we have a whole slew of moderators that will be going into those breakout sessions. So just want to acknowledge all of the moderators that have offered their time to help us out today. And then I also want to acknowledge the Caltrans Enterprise Risk Management Office staff that were able to join us today. They'll be a great resource in that risk is their day-to-day job, and I think they'll be able to provide some insight. They will also be moderators during the breakout session as well. So anyway, so we've got some new things going on in this workshop, and we still have to get through continuing and completing the work that we started in the first day of this workshop. So I will be summarizing that really briefly for those that were unable to attend last week to catch everybody up to speed before we launch into it again. I do want to remind everybody that these sessions are being recorded. It's helpful for us to be able to go back and refer to the recording as we're making notes and finalizing things that we will put into the TAMP. So with that, let me jump into the PowerPoint here. Do you want to go presentation mode? Thank you. Okay, so numbers are still climbing a little bit, but I think in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and get going. We will be using polling anywhere. Next slide, please. So just a reminder, well, before we get to the polls, if for some reason you're in the WebEx and you don't hear any sound, it's probably the way you joined the WebEx. And I'm not sure if you had this option today or not. Maybe this isn't an issue because we're using a little bit different WebEx format for this session to facilitate the breakouts. But we still will use chat, so please make sure you're chatting to everyone if that's your intention. And if you want to get our attention, please raise your hand. Everybody has the ability to unmute themselves today. However, if you're not speaking, we please ask that you do mute your microphone so that we don't get a bunch of feedback. And if the chat's not working for you and you need other assistance, you can always email cttam@dot.ca.gov, and we will monitor that email box during the WebEx and can contact you offline if needed. Next slide. So here's our quick agenda. We're going to do a quick recap of our first risk day last week. Then we're going to complete the risks that were identified in the prior TAMP, plus some new risks that were submitted via survey. And then we'll do a final call for last minute additions. Our goal is to try to get into, sort of our high priority risks and then take those into the breakout sessions to have sort of detailed discussion on a single risk basis. And then we'll come back together. There'll be report outs from each of the breakout groups on every risk. So you'll have an opportunity to weigh in on every risk. It's just the breakout groups will, take the initial crack at the final, and then we can all comment on that. And then we'll get into the 23 CFR 667 requirements. These are the repeatedly damaged infrastructure. There's just a couple slides there. We will be communicating the assets that that had applied for and received ER funds in the state of California. And we'll be sending those to the asset owners and asking them to verify whether it should be included in the listing or not. And then if everything goes well, we'll be doing closing remarks at 4 o'clock. So that's kind of our day. We got a lot going on today, so I'm going to try to keep it moving. Next slide. Okay, we are going to poll again. So hopefully this is getting to be old news for everybody, but if not, let me just go through it real quickly. Open up your text messaging application, and you want to create a new text message, and you want to send that to 22333 is the number, and in the body of the text, type Caltrans 300. If you do that, then you will be part of the poll. So hopefully everybody's getting pretty good at doing this now. Because the first part of the session, we're going to just continue on what we were doing last time. And just a reminder, once you text in Caltrans 300, you're going to get a text reply with a link in there. Don't click the link. If you do, bad things will happen. So once you get a reply, you know you're ready, and just then hold tight for the first poll. Next slide. Okay, so this one should be familiar to those of you that have been part of our surveys before. So if you could just let us know by texting in either the letter A, B, C, D, E, or F for the agency that you represent, that would be very helpful so that we know who's attending. Okay, we've got 88 people in this conference. We expect to see polling from a good 60 of you. Okay, are people still working on the first poll? Again, if you miss the instructions, text to the number 22333 in the body of the text, type in Caltrans 300. And at that point, you'll be able to respond to the poll by putting the appropriate letter in. Okay, I got 92 people in the WebEx, and I've got about 40 respondents. There we go. Some MPOs got in the game now. And some more cities. Appreciate that. All right, we'll let everybody work on getting their polling going. We could see just from the results, there's an awful lot of Caltrans folks. We have not a whole lot of representation, about 10 probably, from cities and counties or other. I know we've got more cities and counties and MPOs out there, so I encourage you to have your voice heard through the polling. So please, you can look in the chat box if you're not sure exactly how to get the polling going. There's instructions, the phone number, and what you should put in the text message. Next slide. Okay, and then next poll is what aspect of your organizations are you representing? And we usually get a lot of Fs, which are the people that I think are representing asset management. See how this one shakes out. We almost made it up to 50% response. um, so there we go. We got up to 50%. Congratulations, everybody. And thank you for those that are just getting in the poll now. So just like our previous workshop, we've got a good mix of perspectives here in terms of the portions of their agencies that everyone's representing. So I think we'll have a really good group to have this risk discussion. Next slide. Okay, so quick recap of day one. Next slide. Just a quick reminder, we're following the risk management process. This is shown by the little circular graphic there that's sourced out of this NCHRP project 20-2474 from 2011. We are going through the assessment process, or we'll be continuing the assessment process, and we'll be working our way through the mitigation and planning and monitoring by the end of this workshop. We did send out a survey after day one, in part to help us identify new risks ahead of time, because it's very challenging to get new risks being identified on the fly and then have polls ready to poll on them. So for those of you that responded, and we did get a number of responses, we appreciate those responses. And we'll go over what those were with everybody. Next slide. So we were polling last week on likelihood of occurrence. That's the vertical scale, and then consequence. And when you put those two together, you find that your response falls into one of these boxes on this grid or risk matrix. We had risk number 5 and 10 were classified as high priority risks, and risks 1 and 6 were classified as medium high. 2, 3, 9, and 12 were medium. The rest were either medium, low, or low, so we didn't put them on this matrix, just so we can kind of focus in on the big picture items. Next slide. So the high risk, risk 5, had to do with accident reporting, and if we weren't getting current accident reporting, then we may not be able to make the best decisions with respect to safety improvement. So that was rated as a high risk. So that one is definitely going to go to a breakout session. Risk 10, if available funding does not cover our needs, and we have deferred maintenance and operations. So, what does that mean? That was also ranked high, and that will also be going to a breakout session. Of the medium high risks that will go to breakout session, the first risk number 1 dealt with making projects more complex by adding multiple things into them, including complete streets and other things, and that could potentially cause some delays on the project delivery end. So that will be going into a breakout. And then risk number 6, if we don't plan for extreme weather events, then bridges, roadways, and structures will be damaged. With respect to risk 6, we did get a response in between last week and this week that basically restated risk 6, but added cost into the equation. So we've modified the risk 6 statement to include damage and cost, and that'll be treated as one risk going forward. Next slide. Of the medium risks from day one, and I think we need to probably make some decisions about whether these are, are worthy of going into breakout session or not. So we had risk number 2. It says that we don't coordinate needs of each asset class or project work. We may not be as efficient as possible. So this is looking at multi-asset projects and efficiency. Risk number 3, if we don't include ITS elements in roadway planning, then we may experience increased congestion and reduced freight mobility. Risk 9, if money is spent on the 4 core assets, that are most in need, then there may not be enough money for assets later down the road to maintain. That one also came in as a medium priority. And then risk 12, if we do not have reliable asset performance models, including reliable decay rates or deterioration models and reasonable goals, and investment decisions will not be optimal. So that also came in as a medium risk. So what we want to do now is we want to get your opinion on these 4 risks. And what we're really asking you to weigh in on, and we'll poll them one at a time. So we'll do risk 2 first. Is this risk, in your opinion, something that we need a further breakout discussion on or not? So, the risk, again, if we don't coordinate needs of each asset class or project work, we may not be as efficient as possible. So can we move to polling for risk number 2? So if you think that that risk is worthy of further breakout discussion, then please text in A. If you don't think that that risk is worthy of further breakout discussion or is not necessary, then text in B. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of results tallying up at the bottom, but nothing showing on the screen. Okay, so this one looks like it's pretty heavily in favor to the need for further breakout discussion of this. We could probably get a few more respondents, but I don't think it's going to change the answer. Okay, so that would be the response for that particular risk. Can we go back one slide? Okay, so risk 2 is in, and now we want to do the same poll for risk 3. Risk 3 says, sorry, if we go back to read the risk real quick so everyone gets a good look at it.
Mike, it's on the slide for the poll. Can you see it?
No.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, perfect.
There you go.
Okay, so the risk is up there. If we don't include ITS elements in roadway planning, then we may experience increased congestion and reduced freight mobility. Does that need further discussion in breakout or not?
Mike, I have a question in general, the way you're phrasing it. Can I ask?
Absolutely, Robert.
Oh, okay, so with respect to the question, it's slightly different than what's on here. I mean, you're asking 2 things. One, do we need a breakout session? And then should it be included in the TAMP? So if we say yes, it should be included in the TAMP, is it automatically going to have a breakout session?
Well, I mean, it's already been identified as a risk. It's a medium risk. In my mind, do we need to develop mitigation strategies? Do we need a monitoring approach for this? Is there any, is there a need for focused work on this risk? It'll be in the TAMP regardless, okay? But really what we're trying to gear up to find out is, do we need to have a breakout session on this risk or not?
Okay, thank you very much for the clarification.
Okay, so this one appears to, looks like it's going to say we think it's pretty self-explanatory what it is, and maybe wouldn't get much value from a breakout session. Okay, should we go on to the next one? Okay, so same kind of lipness test here, if you will, is this is risk number 9, if money is spent on the 4 core assets, bridge pavement, culvert, and ITS, that are in the most need, then there may not be money for assets later down the road, and there may not be enough money to maintain. So same question for risk number 9. It looks like this one's going to go to breakout as well. Okay, should we go on to the next one? If we do not have reliable asset performance models, including reliable decay rates or deterioration rates and reasonable goals, then investment decisions will not be optimal. Okay, this one looks like it's definitely going in. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so appreciate the feedback there. That helps us with those medium risks. For those that are moderators, please check the chat in a minute. I'm going to be assigning risk 2, 9, and 12 to one of you. And then for those other moderators that we haven't assigned a risk to yet, we've still got a few more to go, so hold tight. Okay, so we did we need to complete the initial assessment. So we had 3 risks left from the prior TAMP. So we're going to do likelihood and consequence there. And then we will do the breakouts, and then we'll come back and do the repeatedly damaged infrastructure after the breakouts and the breakout reports. Next slide. All right, Don, I'll kick it over to you to go through the 3 remainders from the last TAMP.
Everyone, hopefully, sorry, I had a note pop up on my screen, which was interesting. So John Gillis, if you were trying to access something, I declined it. So please go ahead and send whatever you need to through chat, and we'll help you out there. So as far as the next session, as Mike had indicated, we're going to go through a number of additional risks, and we will be polling you just similar to our last session. So hang in there with us. I know this is a little bit lengthy to get through. So here we go. Let me make sure I got my thing here. So before we do, I just want to summarize a few things that we talked about last time and make sure we're all on board, especially if you're new to our risk management workshop. So Mike had already summarized our risk assessment from day 1. We'll be doing the same thing for the rest of these risks. We will be using this risk consequence matrix, which provides a common scale by which different groups can assess likelihood and impact of different risks. And as you can see here, the likelihood of occurrence is showing there on the vertical, and the consequence is going horizontally, and the consequence is the product of its likelihood that it will occur times its impact. And as you can see, you end up with this color variation, where of course red is our high risk, all the way down to green, which is considered a low risk for us. And how are we going to be looking at our risks? We do this likelihood first, where we're looking at how likely is this risk to occur over time. And if it's considered a high likelihood, you're looking at something that would occur within a year period of time. And if it's a low risk, we're looking at greater than 25 years. And then the scale there is segmented by specific year. So you can definitely weigh in on that for each of these risks that will be presented to you today. And then for the consequence, we have two different scales depending upon the risk as well. We have a cost perspective, which is looking at, how costly is this risk going to be for you as an agency. If it's a low cost or no cost, of course, you have the opportunity to think about that with regards to your particular agency. This comment came in last time about, well, can you give us some idea of what you mean by cost? And, for a small agency, $1 million may be significant. It may be considered medium to high cost. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got Caltrans, and $1 million is considered a minor project in our world. So you just have to think about it and put your judgment to work as far as weighing in on these risks. And then as far as the consequence to our system, the system impacts, we're looking at, closure times and full loss of a critical route as being the highest consequence. So that's going to be the way that we're going to ask you to weigh in on the importance of these risks. And we're going to go ahead and start with this particular slide also is to kind of give you some ways to think about this. I presented this last go around as well, where we use the RISK as a way to think about the risk. Is the risk still relevant, especially for these initial TAMP risks that occurred or that were determined 4 years ago? And then is the in the I, in the influence category, what do we mean by that? Well, in some cases, a TAMP risk, yes, it is a risk, but it may not have an impact to our financial plan and investment strategies. So think about that in terms of your scoring of the risk as well. The statement, of course, is an important part of this. And if you don't think the risk statement is accurately represented, please weigh in on that. And especially for these higher priority risks that are going to be going to the breakout sessions, if you have more to say on that, definitely bring it up in the breakout groups. And then the K is keep in mind that we really need this in the form of an if-then statement for the risk. That's the way that we're going to be handling that as we move forward, especially when we're asking you if there's any additional risks that we haven't identified so far. Okay, so with that, we're going to start with our initial and our first risk from the initial TAMP, which is risk 13. So if we don't incorporate climate change into system planning models, assets may be permanently damaged. So at this time, we'd like you to go ahead and text A, B, C, D, E, or F on the likelihood that this risk will occur. And we'll give you guys a little bit of time to weigh in on that. And as we're doing this, there were a couple of comments that did come in that I should probably bring up at this point. We had a couple of MPOs that indicated that, make sure I get it here, this includes impact of hotter weather on pavement conditions. That was one comment that came in. Another one that came in said, that again, if we don't get the funding to cover this, that we're not going to be able to repair and restore our local streets and roads. So just something to think about with regards to risk 13 as you go ahead and score. Yeah, it looks like we're doing pretty good. Let me look at the total number, 46. So let's try to do that then and move forward and do the consequence to the system for this particular risk. And if this time, if you could just text A, B, C, D, or E A being a no cost or impact to the system, all the way to E being a critical loss of a route or very high cost.
Hey, Dawn, can you remind me to record the results? I lost the last result.
Oh no, okay, do we need to go back? I'm trying to get through this and I went too
Yeah.
quickly here. Okay,
Yeah,
we're
when
gonna
you
go back. Yep, let's go ahead and finish this one, and I apologize. We need to make sure we record these.
Dawn,
Rather
you
than
can
have
let
everyone
this one-
revote, the answer was D, I believe.
Okay.
So maybe we'll just capture that.
Was it D? Okay,
It
thanks,
was
Mike.
D.
I took a snapshot of the screen anyway. I can share it. This is Bassem from District 12.
Thank you, Bassem. I appreciate it, everybody, as I'm wanting to keep us on target here, but I don't want to miss anything, so I apologize. So if we can get a few more, we're at about 28 results, and I think our first likelihood was around 46 or 47. So let's wait for a few more to come in. Okay, one more second. I'll give those of you who need to respond, if you could do so at this time, so that we could close the poll. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call it. And Yue, could you go ahead and record this at this time?
Yes, got it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, we're going to move on to the next risk. And that initial TAMP risk is if we don't train and mentor employees, then we will have large knowledge gaps in the workforce. So at this time, let me just say we did have one comment that came in from a county agency on this that said the lack of mentoring will ultimately impact our state's transportation system. So someone felt really strongly about this particular risk. If there's any other comments that anyone would like to share before we poll, we'll go ahead and take those through chat at this time. Okay, I am going to go ahead and say let's move forward and determine the likelihood that this risk will occur by texting A, B, C, D, E, or F at this time. We're at 40 responses. Looks like it's slowed down. One more come in. Okay, if you haven't had a chance, please go ahead and respond at this time so that we can close the poll. Okay, let's go ahead and record the likelihood that this risk will occur.
I got it.
Perfect. Go ahead and move to the consequence. So for this one, we'd like you to go ahead and text A, B, C, D, E, or E on the consequence to the system that this particular risk would have. And this is if we don't train and mentor employees, then we will have large knowledge gaps in the workforce. Okay, at this point, if you haven't had the opportunity to respond, if you could do that quickly, we could close the poll. Okay. Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll at this time.
Got it.
Perfect. Thank you. Let's go ahead and move to the last initial TAMP risk, which is risk 15. If the department and regions are unable to use innovative project delivery tools with the new funding, and I think at the time this was SB1 funding, then it may take longer to deliver needed transportation work. So at this time, I didn't have any comments that came in prior on this particular risk. If anybody has anything and wants to share it, go ahead and do so through chat.
Hey, Don, this is one that, you know, going back to the initial TAMP, this was done right after the passage of SB1. This risk was primarily geared, you know, in this environment that we knew there was new money coming in at both state and local levels, and there was some concern about our ability to deliver the work. You know, at this point, I think this has largely been overcome by events. But as someone, Valency noted, it could apply to the new federal funding. It's possible, but the new federal funding is much smaller than SB1 would have been or was.
So it looks like some of you have weighed in already on the likelihood that this risk will occur, and if you can continue to provide your response at this time, that would be great. We'll let it go a few more seconds here. And where are we? We're about 31. That's typically on the low end that I've seen. If anybody hasn't had the chance to weigh in on this one, please do so at this time so that we can close the poll. Okay, it looks like it's slowed down. So let's go ahead and close the poll at this time and go ahead and capture the results.
Got it.
Okay, great. So we're going to move on to the next one. This is just going to be the consequence. So if you could please weigh in on the consequence to the system that this risk would have by either texting A, B, C, D, or E at this time. And we will be on to our newly defined risks. Okay, if you haven't had the chance to, okay, we're getting close to our end here. We're at 30. So if you haven't had a chance, please weigh in at this time so we can close the poll. Okay, let's go ahead. Yep, we've got a few more coming in here. Okay, I think it's okay to go ahead and close at this time since we have an overwhelming majority there for a medium cost or short-term loss of route.
Got it.
We got it. Okay, wonderful. We're going to move to one of our newly defined risks for the 2022 TAMP update. And this risk is if we don't program projects, and I think it was, and record or report on expenditures by NHS designation and by the 5 federal work types, then investments in pavement and bridges on the NHS will not be accurately identified. So this particular risk was something that had been mentioned to us through our federal partners that, you know, they understood that we're having to estimate this for the state of California, both on the state and local side. And so they would like to see some improvements in this area made, and it is a risk to the TAMP. So at this point, I would open it up if anybody has any comments before we poll on this particular risk. Any additional comments or feedback? We did talk a lot about this in the financial planning workshop a month or so ago. I hope you were in attendance there, and you probably have a lot more history and background at this point to weigh in on this risk. Okay, looks like we're ready to go. Some people have already started. So we're asking you to, at this time, go ahead and determine A, B, C, D, E, or F and text one of those letters on the likelihood that this risk will occur. Looks like it's slowed down. I think we have a couple more coming in. So if you have not had the opportunity to text in yet, please do so we could close the poll. Okay, let's go ahead and record the response on this one.
Got it.
Okay, great. Now we're going to ask you to weigh in on the consequence of this particular risk to the system itself by texting A, B, C, D, or E at this time. Okay, if you have not had a chance to record your response, please do so that we can close out this poll. And we'll go ahead and let's go ahead and record the response at this time.
Got it.
So our next risk that came in through our survey last week was if last-minute construction strategies change during a freeway rehab or similar project, then local agency impacts are difficult to evaluate and manage. So I don't have additional comments that came in on this one, but if anybody would like to share on this particular risk before we score it, that would be great. And otherwise, we'll move forward. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move forward with the polling for this particular risk at this time by texting A, B, C, D, E, or F on the likelihood that this risk will occur. Okay, we're at about 30. We can get a few more responses, then we can close this poll. So if you haven't had the opportunity to weigh in on this one, please do so at this time. Okay, I'm going to call it. So let's go ahead and record the response.
Got it.
Thank you, Yue. Let's move to the consequence. So at this time, please go ahead and text A, B, C, D, or E on the consequence to the system for this particular risk. from either a cost perspective or impact to the system through closures. Okay, we need a few more, hopefully, to come in. So if you have not had an opportunity to weigh in on this one, please do so at this time. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call it. Have we recorded this particular response?
Got it.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to another one. Here's another newly defined risk for the TAMP. If infrastructure is exposed or vulnerable to IT security, ransomware, hacking issues, then asset or data systems can be out of function for an extended time. This one actually came in from somebody at Caltrans, and I don't have any other feedback on it, but if anybody would like to provide comments at this time, please include them in the chat, and then we'll go ahead and take the poll. Everyone's quiet this afternoon. Okay. We're going to then go forward and do our polling on the likelihood that this risk will occur. Please text A, B, C, D, E, or F at this time. Okay, if you haven't had a chance to weigh in, please do so we can close out this poll. Okay, oh, we got a couple more coming in at the last minute. Great. Ooh, now the response has changed. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll at this time. Please, Yue, have you recorded this one?
Got it.
Okay, great. So let's go to the consequence then. The consequence to the system for this particular risk, if you could go ahead and text A, B, C, D, or E at this time, that would be great. Okay, if you haven't had an opportunity to respond, please do so at this time. And we'll go ahead and call it. Okay, here comes, so we'll give it another second or so, and then we're going to call it. It's coming in. Okay, let's go ahead and close the poll, and hopefully you have
Got it.
recorded it. Okay, perfect. Okay, let's go to our next risk. Our next risk is if the transit system is not maintained in a state of good repair, then the highway system will see more impacts to the traffic capacity and to preservation of roads and bridges. And this one came in from a local agency. Does anybody have anything they'd like to mention before we poll? You can do that by entering in the chat, and then we can go from there. Okay, let's move forward then, and we will go ahead and start the poll on the likelihood that this risk will occur by texting A, B, C, D, E, or F. Getting a number of responses, that's great. Let's see what we got here, 31. So at this time, if we could go ahead, if you haven't had the chance to respond, please do so we could close the poll. Okay, let's go ahead and record it.
Got it.
Last one. Got it? Okay. So at this time, we're going to poll on the consequence for this particular risk to the system by texting A, B, C, D, or E at this time. Well, I haven't really seen too many of these where it's only two different options. There's a third one coming in. Okay. So if you haven't had the opportunity at this time to respond, please do so that we can close the poll.
What was the likelihood response, Don? Sorry. Or
UA
UA?
has that, yeah.
Can you give me a letter, UA?
Is a C.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go ahead and record this one as well for the consequence, and it is C as well, Mike.
Got it.
Okay, we're going to move on to risk 6. This is the last risk that came in that we're going to weigh in on before we take any additional risks today. So this risk 6 is if funding in the highway bridge program continues at the same level for the foreseeable future, the necessary maintenance of bridges will be delayed and bridges in good repair could slide into fair and or poor condition. So we'd like you to comment on this one if you have anything that you would like to mention or bring up before we poll. Anybody have any feedback on this one? Okay, then let's do it. Let's go ahead at this time and poll on the likelihood that this risk will occur by texting A, B, C, D, E, or F at this time. Okay, it looks like we got a good response rate. Let's look at that. We've got 32. So at this time, let's go ahead. Oops, I just messed that up. Let's go ahead and if anybody hasn't had the opportunity to do so, please respond so that we can close the poll. Okay, let's go ahead and close it. Have we recorded this one?
Yes.
Okay, great. So one last one here. Let's go ahead and respond on the consequence for this particular risk. And again, this risk has to do with highway bridge funding and the potential that it may not be enough, right, for us to complete our maintenance and repair work. And we're getting halfway there, I think. We need a few more responses. Slow down. If you haven't had the opportunity to respond, please do so at this time. Okay, I think we can call it. The majority, I think, is going to not change. So let's go ahead and record it.
Got it.
Okay, great. So for this next part, I really appreciate everybody's time on this. This is a lot, I get it. But we are going to move into this next period of our workshop, which is really to open it up to all of you again and say, okay, we've looked at a number of risks already identified through the initial TAMP and also through a survey that was sent out. We wanted to get as much as we could going into this workshop to try to streamline it and so forth. But we still feel like we need you guys to be heard. This is a collaborative effort here, and we want to make sure that we've captured everybody's voice and concerns when it comes to risk and the TAMP. So we are going to be opening this up for any additional risks that you have, but we want you to keep two things in mind. Think of it in terms of, you know, again, these higher priority risks. You know, there's a lot of risks out there, whether it's organizational risks and so forth, but we'd really like to keep it focused on TAMP risks that could impact financial plans and investment strategies moving forward. And if you do have a risk, please include it as in the form of a risk statement. And an example is here below, but I think you guys have all seen these risk statements at this point, so I don't think I need to elaborate on that. So at this time, we're going to open it up and just say, you know, you have this opportunity, so please go ahead and share with everyone a risk that may be important to you that you think would be important to the state of California and the National Highway System performance and the TAMP. And if nothing comes through chat, then actually we're on time for our next segment. So either way, it's all good, but it would be great to hear from all of you too. So, I'll just give you another moment or two to think about it. And I don't know, Mike, if you had anything you wanted to mention at this time or anybody else, or if you have questions. We'll take a couple questions as well.
One comment. So we've identified risks for all of our moderators at this point. So just a FYI on that. If we identify additional risks beyond what we have, then we're probably going to have to drop something off. from
Okay.
our breakout at least.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think everyone has probably thought about it long enough, right? We're on day 2, and we've seen a number of risks and some very high priority risks for us to think about as far as risk management and risk mitigation. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next topic area in the presentations. So Mike, you're up.
Thanks, Don. Hey, Don, there's just, for the moderators, just call your attention to the chat for moderator assignments. There is a question from Nate Leday. Don, if you could respond to that. Okay,
great,
so
yeah.
I'll go to presentation mode here. Next slide, please. So we've just gone through the identification and the assessment, and now we're gonna move into our mitigation and planning in terms of our risk management process wheel here. Next slide. So one of the things that we're going to be asking you to do in the breakout is to identify the most likely strategy for risk. And again, we're not going to do this through polling. It's going to happen in your breakout session. So you'll be kind of focusing in on one risk in the breakout. But the question is it appropriate to try to mitigate or treat the risk? And so for that would mean that we would take some actions or series of actions to reduce the likelihood and or consequence of the risk. We could choose to just tolerate or accept the risk, meaning, we recognize that there is a risk, but also recognize that there's not a whole lot we could do about it. So a good example of something like that would be, risk of some pending legislation or something. While it could influence our work, we don't really have a whole lot of control over it. If there's a risk, and I'm not sure that I saw any, but if there are ones that could be avoided through elimination, then we would identify it as terminate. If you have a risk that would be appropriate to transfer, in other words, shift the risk from one entity to another, this could be done through, say, a relinquishment of a transportation system or some other means, then we would, our strategy there would be to transfer. And then if for some reason, our risk is really an opportunity, or it is an opportunity, then we could take advantage of it. So we just wanted to kind of run through what we're calling the 5 T's here, so that when you get into breakout, you have a little bit of background, because your moderators are going to be asking you, what is the appropriate strategy, these 5 T's. So it's treat, tolerate, terminate, transfer, or take advantage of. Next slide. So I put this table together for a presentation that I did nationally, and it looks at some of the risks that we considered before, and abridged a little bit. I took some liberties here for the purposes of demonstrating it. But when we look at a risk, for example, look at like something like, I mentioned change legislation, but look at like tort liability. So can we anticipate it? Yeah, we can anticipate some tort liability. Can we mitigate it? Maybe some, but we also have to just accept some. And then there's this final question, which is, is this appropriate to be in the TAMP? And we had one of our risks, which I don't know if it made it up to the top in the voting, but had to do with succession planning or mentoring. Those risks, yes, we could anticipate them. Yes, we could potentially treat them, but the treatment is really not within the bounds of the TAMP. So then when you get to this next question, should it be within the TAMP or elsewhere? And you see in the table here, I'm saying it should be elsewhere, meaning succession planning should be part of an enterprise risk management plan, not necessarily the TAMP, although it could have some relation on our ability to deliver work. It's not really within the boundaries of the TAMP to solve that problem. Same with continuity of operations, right? It's, yes, we know there's a risk there, but it's probably not in the TAMP. And then if you say, you see all of these that say NA, there's 3 that say NA there. The reason they say NA is because if you can't anticipate it, then you probably have to accept it. And at that point, there's no impact in the TAMP. So anyway, when you get into breakouts, your moderators will be asking you to assess the appropriate treatment. And if you can think about it in this context, can you anticipate the risk? Can it, what is the appropriate treatment? And then is it appropriate to be within the TAMP or not? Next slide. Okay, so when you get into breakouts, we're giving the moderators the latitude if they feel they need to retool the risk statement a little bit. I mean, obviously not coming up with a whole new risk statement, but if there's something that needs to be added or, something that needs to be reworded, then they have that latitude. So here's an example of the mitigation approaches. So, if we don't plan for extreme weather events, then pavements and bridges will be damaged. So is that something we can accept or transfer, or is it an opportunity? Probably no, no, and no. Let's go, so what do we want to do here? Well, we want to try to mitigate, right? So how do we mitigate? We within Caltrans at least develop vulnerability assessments. So we identify what's vulnerable. We develop adaptation plans to further refine exactly what needs to be done. And then, within our respective agencies, we would want to prioritize these risks and ultimately with the hope of developing a project and funding a project to mitigate. Next. And then as far as monitoring approaches, which is an important component for the risk and one that was an area that was identified that we could have improved from our prior TAMP. So, how are we going to monitor whether we're making progress towards this? We develop an implementation plan, with timeline, costs, or whatever, but then we also have to keep tabs of whether we're executing on that. And so that might be a reasonable monitoring approach. But it's the whole idea is, how can you check back in on that risk to say, yes, we're making progress or we're not. So, in the case of this particular statement, we could point to specific highway segments or particular bridges that have been mitigated as evidence that you're mitigating this risk. Next slide. Okay, so hopefully, maybe before we depart, if there's any moderator that is not sure what their risk is, please say something now before we break everybody up.
Yes, Mike, I included the risk statements for those that I caught. So risk 2, risk 9, risk 12, and N3 I've included in the chat. If there's another that someone doesn't have assigned, let us know as far as the risk statement.
So UA has N6 and you have N1, Dawn. And that's
Yes,
also
I
in
have
the chat.
N1.
And UA
Yeah.
has N6.
I don't have N6
I have,
statement
yeah.
here. You have
UA
it?
has N6.
And I have Enya in one, so I'm okay.
All right, looks like we're ready for the big split up, Mary Alice.
So here's some additional points that we want to go over before the breakout. Would you like to do that, Mike, or would you like me to?
I'll cover it. Go ahead. So
Okay.
we're going to have 30 minutes, and then we're going to bring everyone back together to report out. You'll have a facilitator or moderator. They'll walk everybody through it and kind of lead the discussion, or at least make sure discussion happens. It's, the point of doing the breakout is to get into a small group setting. So hopefully there's more dialogue than we're able to have with 100 people on a big, in the big session. And then the results from each of the breakout sessions will be presented briefly to the broader group. So everybody will have a chance to comment on all of the risks. Next slide. Okay, we talked about all of this, I think pretty much. And moderators have all these instructions as well. So let's just move to the next slide.
I believe that's it, Mike.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, let's do the split up. Dawn, why don't we start with you? Why don't you do the first report out and sort of model the way?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I had, I think it was identified as risk N1. So it was a newly identified risk that came in. And it said, the risk statement said something like this. It said, if expenditures and the programming of projects are not designated by NHS and in the federal work types, then the investments in pavement and bridges on the NHS won't be identified. So we talked a lot about that and what it meant to begin with. So I gave a little bit of history on our prior workshop on how Caltrans is estimating the expenditures on the NHS, and also talked about some of the challenges that we're having. So when we went through all of that, I think the outcome was that the group felt that we definitely needed to mitigate that risk. And we got two different responses. We had our local agency from Marin County. So Pat was on in our breakout session, and he had a lot of input, really good input for us. And after all of the discussion, really he felt like if we get our accounting systems to create a field for the NHS, then that's the best way to do it. And we talked about how State Controller's Office is the one that actually is collecting all of this information, and they have the database. So if we could get that field included in their database, that would be great. On the Caltrans side, we are in the process of updating the asset management tool, the asset management system that we have, to designate NHS for our projects. And that's going to be a really good thing for us to be able to then go to the accounting system with our project numbers and get that information. So we had a lot of talk about, what are those mitigation actions that needed to happen. Who is responsible? It's really all of us, our local agencies, Caltrans, our MPOs. We all need to be aware of this moving forward and take action to get the financial reporting fixed for designating where we are when we're spending our expenditures, if we're on NHS or non-NHS. And then as far as, what is needed, of course, we need organizational support to do it. We need other state agencies to be on board. It is a priority. And I think moving forward for the tracking and monitoring purpose of this particular risk, it's being able to understand the timeline in order to make this happen. And that could be challenging, but I think if we had a good plan in place, that we could make it happen. We can make it, definitely make progress on improvements moving forward. So that's all I had.
Okay, thanks, Dawn. Any comments or things that we would need to change or anyone wants to change on that risk statement? Okay, not hearing anything. Okay, so Melissa, maybe we'll go to you next.
Okay. All right. I had a small group, so it was really great to have everybody be able to talk about this. Let me share my screen. Okay. Okay. So our team had the risk too, if we do not coordinate the needs of each asset class or project work, then we may not be able to efficiently be as efficient as possible. So everyone, we discussed 3 different treatments, and so real quickly, I want to go through them. From a local perspective, Rudy talked about, some of our mitigation actions utilizing some of the WBS and our project teams and project control. So you have people that can work together to treat and coordinate it. And so specifically who's responsible is on the project manager on that project team. And then we want to allow the appropriate resources for that particular project. And so we would have to mitigate but we might have some limitations based on availability of resources, and so we want to ensure that we have those resources and monitor by getting feedback from the PM or project control from the team. Another mitigation strategy, and I'll have to admit that I introduced myself as from asset management, not necessarily the TAMS project manager, but our Caltrans team did suggest that some of the things that we could look at to mitigate this was potentially looking at BI data sharing solutions such as TAMS, uses of new databases to track assets, increasing and while increasing public and stakeholder coordination, and then also promoting open data. And so we want for Caltrans and the project manager to lead some of these discussions to provide advice on get advice, from asset program advisors, and some of the things that the agency might need to do is develop roles and responsibilities and training for the different and work on the different coordination. So the rest of those responses were relative to implementing that and the limitation of dollar, staff, and knowledge. And then really quickly on the third treatment is really just increasing that coordination specifically between asset management, planning, and programming, with Caltrans as the lead office, and looking at how we're spending money wisely, and everybody's willingness to share information. So databases and other things could help with some of that coordination. So those are 3 other treatments that we had talked about.
Great, thanks, Melissa. Any other thoughts or comments on risk number 2? Okay, for the moderators, I'm trying to give you a little bit of advance notice so you're not caught off guard. So for next reports, we'll do Nate, then Lee, then Bossum, then Valency. So Nate, why don't you go ahead?
Yep, sounds good. We'll go ahead and share my screen here. So the risk statement we were working with, is it sharing?
Starting to.
There we go. All right. If we make projects more complex by the addition of multiple assets that involve complete streets, project delivery may be delayed. We had a lot of great discussion about the risk statement, how there's certainly some aspects of increased complexity, and so maybe for some of this it's sort of just tolerate. But we did dig into some treatment options in terms of mitigation specifically. So on the local level, maybe some decision-making tools. Obviously a lot of this is going to require case-by-case analysis in terms of whether or not to add on multiple asset types, involve complete streets, etc. And so, having criteria or guidance is very helpful in terms of all that decision making. On the state response, we talked a good deal about different kinds of design exemptions. One particular example, the idea of perhaps a bridge that doesn't even necessarily have any way to walk or bike or anything up to it, but that we might feel compelled to put that access up there, even though there's no real egress. In terms of a responsible party, we talked about, really it would be the lead agency on the project, or perhaps the owner of the asset. Often that maybe Caltrans, and there could be some standardization benefits of Caltrans being a responsible party, even when it is not necessarily the owner, especially if the locals don't have the resources or the particular know-how. In terms of what's needed, resources in terms of funding for additional improvements, training, getting the contextual information, again, especially for the decision making, because a lot of times these projects are designed or initiated much earlier than they are implemented, and so the same people aren't always on the project, and so a lot of times the contextual information for some of the decision making is lost. In terms of risk priority, it kind of depended on who you were asking in our group. We had a group and a lot of great discussion. In terms of how we would move forward, similar to some of the mitigation ideas we'd already discussed. Long-term, all of this really is about long-term planning and, trying to plan when it does make sense to do, multiple asset types in the same project, and when maybe it's not worth the delay and other costs. And then in terms of monitoring, there were a couple of really good ideas, comparing, for instance, on specifically the Caltrans side, comparing number of design exemption applications versus approvals over time could be a method of monitoring and sort of checking your controls on an ongoing basis, and understanding a baseline of how many projects, are we talking about, how many projects are potentially getting these additional elements throughout the time. So that's the bulk of it that we went through, and it was a great group and some really great discussion on a very important risk.
Thanks, Nate. Any thoughts from the broader group on Nate's report? Okay, quiet bunch. All right, Lee, let's jump on over to you. Moderators could share your screen or not. It's your choice.
Okay, so the risk that we discussed was if we do not have reliable asset performance models, including reliable decay rates and reasonable goals, then investment decisions will not be optimal. Excuse me. We, in addition to Caltrans individuals in our breakout group, we did have 4 stakeholders from around the state, Sacramento, Madera, Fresno, and Los Angeles. And while 3 of the 4, it really wasn't in their lane, if you will, we still did get some inputs from them, and then we'll go down to the greater input that we received from LA, as well as additional from Caltrans. So basically, what we're talking about here is the math is, if we don't have the data, the infrastructure renewal in good state of repair, if we don't have the data to help drive our funding decisions, to help us understand what our state of the roads are in regards to necessary funding, we're really in a bind. And so definitely the group as a whole talked about using project analysis tools when selecting projects. And Sacramento is in fact going a step further, as hopefully others are. They are progressing towards equitable projects with an equity indexed direction that they're moving towards. But again, Connor from Sacramento, well, I appreciate the comments. This wasn't his lane per se, and so I just wanted to include his other comments. Madera, again, this was not in her lane. She indicated they have no models to rely on for asset modeling, but they do work collaboratively with the local MPO, and so that was really the input that we were able to receive in that regard. Fresno, again, work the same. No models, really not her lane, and that's okay. And also, they work on a collaborative basis with their MPOs in this regard. And again, there might be others within their organizations that would have more information in this regard, but that's the best we could provide for this breakout group. So LA Metro, and I know I should remember your name and I apologize. Errol, thank you. So Errol talked about, he said that definitely they would treat this risk and that data is key. Failure incidents and repair history really helps them. The data helps them determine the failure incidents and the repair history. They have, he's with LA Metro, Infrastructure, Maintenance, and Engineering. They do not have a performance model, but they're moving in that direction by introducing monitoring systems to provide additional data to help predict failures. Funding is most difficult. Enterprise Transit Asset Management Department, they have one. The highest priority, and they're there to make sure the highest priorities are supported by the data so that they can then request funding. As far as how they'd like to move forward, keep upper management informed of the data that they have throughout the year. Hopefully to help them understand from all levels how receptive a project might be. In the past, sometimes decisions were made without without input all the way down the chain, and that having that engagement throughout the chain helps not only in the decision making, but also when upper management has to go and quote unquote sell these decisions internally to others in regards to funding. In LA, it says moving into new equipment, monitoring technology, which hopefully will create more performance models. They have a department which helps monitor systems and accepts unsolicited proposals, and that was known as the Office of Extraordinary Innovation. And if I ever move back to LA, I'm going to apply for that position. And so, yeah, that was our input from LA Metro. Definitely are treating this, are moving in a positive direction, and they are putting new controls in place that will help them in this regard. Had a couple inputs from Caltrans personnel talking about the need for reliable data in helping with the decision-making process. There's a commentary that prior to the 2018 movement towards this process itself, it was not not as focused, shall we say, from the perspective of that individual. Internally, we've transitioned to Tableau to enhance the asset management tool, but need to add more tools and measure a more realistic tool for accuracy. Help measure models are still in the work, need to establish reasonable goals based on the individual assets, how they are deteriorating, and different assets deteriorate differently and need different measures. And so all in all, yes, the group as a whole felt as though this is a high priority issue, that in some regards, some are moving in a positive direction, but I think in all regards, there's a lot of room for improvement regarding this risk. Thank you.
All right. Should I go next? This is Bassam. You guys see my screen?
Yeah, it looks good, Bassam. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. So we had a great small group these are the names of the attendees of the group and their title. So we had one from San Joaquin Council, Travis Yokoyama, and also we had a senior environmental planner from headquarters, Stewart, and also Trina from headquarters, Division of Local Assistant, the ATP program in our team, in the workout group. Our risk was N3, which is if an infrastructure is exposed or vulnerable to IT, security, ransomware, hacking issues, then assets or data system can be out of function for an extended period of time. I don't know if Mike Johnson have a vision intentionally how he gave us this particular item, because I happen to be in a team representing District 12 in Orange County here with a pilot test for hacking the Caltrans system that a Fed's representative came from the Department of Homeland Security about a few years ago, actually. And we touched up a little bit on it, and a lot of lessons learned from this hacking test. I'm assuming they're bringing the best hacker in the state, in the government, and they were trying basically to hack into the system of Caltrans and see to basically identify areas that are very vulnerable. One of which were the controller cabinets through the signals, and there came up to be some recommendations. So I'm glad Mike actually assigned this, had quite a bit of backgrounds on it. The team, we started with Travis from San Joaquin Council of Government. He represents the regional partners. He focused on the training. I guess the key item on it is that when you train the right staff to be managing the IT, monitoring the potential threats, that's whether it's an enterprise or an infrastructure, the training would be needed for the staff that's really monitoring this within the organization itself. He focused on maybe fixing the problem first and then train. So if you already know of a system that's broken, some hubs that we know of an issue on, before you even do the training, well, maybe protect your infrastructure first and then start doing training. Here's lesson learned for it. So this is what they're having. This responsibility under their IT manager. He talked about like the email system, kind of similar to what we have in Caltrans, where a random email gets sent to all the users in San Joaquin Council of Government, and if someone accidentally click on it, then he failed that test. So this is a test. We have something similar with Caltrans as well. Additionally, the two other members, speaking with Trina from headquarters, Division of Land, Local Assistant Program, also agreed that the training is needed, expertise and resources, resources for people to monitor the system, those firewalls, those monitor, those key triggers that the system, someone is hacking from this IP address at this location, and here's the impact, right? So risk mitigation, again, training, enhanced password protection of the database. It's very important that we heavily rely on data, and lack of it, and this is great, this is true, lack of it will have adverse impact on our work. As an asset manager for District 12, we definitely identify our need based on the data. So if the data is not communicating due to a hacking system, you lost that connectivity. So it becomes very important. She touched on a key important thing, which is a lot of time in the local assistance program, they've been approached or asked to have connectivity to the local. It's two ways. And we did have something similar to that also with the ICM, Integrated Corridor Management Project. We're actually not pushing traffic to the outside, but we're also receiving traffic from major events, major bridge generation events. So that level of communication between external partner and internal is very crucial, which means the firewall or we talked a little bit about the cloud, connecting through a cloud system that at a certain point can be shut down if there is a threat or a risk that the system get triggered by it. So the infrastructure is really needed, and this was what Stewart from environmental planning in headquarters also had touched on, which is the need for hardware and infrastructure system to secure it. Again, agreed on the security. One thing we always remember is users are the first line of defense. So protecting us from ourselves, that's an important thing. So we are maybe the first line of protection to the system, because we can maybe clicking on things or allowing maybe malware to be into the system itself. There was quite a bit of discussion on the periodic diagnostic, the daily checks. So the system basically self-check, basically, and run this. Is there any connectivity? Is there a connection, say, from an accounting that should be in only communicating with asset management or so forth, right? So unexpected connectivity. So we also talked about the security at all levels will need to be addressed, need access point, also to share with local agency. Was a very vibrant group, was even small, but they were very vocal. We were able to spare a few minutes at the end to have a break. So again, thank you to the team for their participation. It was a great work for all of them. So with that, I'm done.
Thank you, Bassam. Very comprehensive. Any comments related to the IT or TMS security? Okay, I'm going to we've got 5 more report outs to do. We've got about 15 minutes to get them done. So with that kind of time scale, I will turn it over to Valency.
So we had risk number 9. If money is spent on the 4 core assets, bridge, pavement, culverts, and ITS that are in the most need, then there may not be money for assets later down the road, and there may not be enough money to maintain. Our team we had Hamid and Hector and Joe and myself from Caltrans, and we had Jerome Joaquin from the city of Fullerton, and we had Jared Carvalho from SBCAG. When we were reviewing our risk, one of the things that we noted was that it kind of seemed like we had 2 risks embedded in one. One was, not enough funding to maintain the other assets that haven't had enough investment due to prioritization of the 4 core assets. And then the other one was not enough funding to maintain the new inventory created by the additional SB1 funding. When that funding goes away, we won't have the funding to maintain that additional inventory. When we were looking at responses, we kind of had while the local and state responses they're pretty similar, but they're kind of in a different form. For the locals, it would be, if they don't have enough funding for the other assets, they might shift some funding around to be able to, to have a treat response or strategy, or they might create a measure for funding, and that would kind of terminate the problem. So we had kind of a combination of treat or terminate for mitigation strategies. The state response was to make sure that the legislative funding, that we had new legislative funding, or that it would guarantee performance for the supplementary assets as well. Also, we could, there's the possibility of creating new funding sources for maintaining the new inventory, or in the case of sea level rise, maybe it's legislative funding for sea level rise to terminate that risk. For risk owners, we identified, the funding, it would depend on the funding agency, or the funding agency would be the risk owner. Also, the owner operator, we kind of talked about the inventory managers being, a big part of being the risk owners for this risk. Mitigation needs. We pretty much agreed that that we would need, to mitigate it, we'd need resources and organizational support. So either through legislation or executive decision, so that we have some decisions made high up on how to, to prioritize funding. Risk priority. The risk priority. Risk was a priority for everyone. And we all agreed that our limitations are resources and the funding to mitigate the risks. So it's we all recognize the risk. We're probably very good at identifying the risk, but we are challenged sometime in finding the resources and the funding to mitigate those risks. Tracking and monitoring. We think that, one of the most important things is to prioritize the needs so that we make sure that we've very well communicated what our prioritization is on all of the assets. And then it's going to be important for the inventory managers. They need to anticipate, the need. So, make sure that they project the asset conditions and communicate that there could be a problem coming. And then determining that maintenance funding need is going to be an important component to, handling the risk.
Okay, thank you, Valency. Any other thoughts or comments related to this risk? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Valency. Dave Changizi, let's move over to you next.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to be sharing my screen as well, see if it works.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So our group had to deal with risk number 10, which is if the available funding does not cover our needs, then we will still have some deferred maintenance and operations needs. So we had a group, a group of 4 people, all from Caltrans. Unfortunately, we didn't have anyone from locals or other agencies, but still, we were able to come up with good ideas. In terms of the strategy, the agreement was that we pretty much have to tolerate it because we don't have much control over getting receiving funding, funding. So, but then because we don't have as much control, we can to some extent transfer the responsibility to the funding to the other people who provide the funding for Caltrans. So who will be the responsible party for this? Pretty much legislators. We were unanimous about this, but the group was legislators and liaison groups. To a lesser degree, CTC. These are kind of the risk owners, as well as programming to another lesser degree. So legislators, liaison groups, and then CTC, and ultimately programming a little bit. Also, regarding the mitigation need, we agreed that, or the group agreed to use resources and increase the chances of reimbursements, and or have get in touch with locals and have a good communication with them to receive some contributions, as well as adopting some advanced construction approaches or some mitigations if available to borrow from future programming. See, so these are kind of some mitigations. All agreed that it's that issue, the funding issue, is a high priority. And in terms of risk mitigation, partnership with locals, communication with locals is very important. Be as transparent as we could is very important, and then just locals, but policymakers in general. Tracking and monitoring. we concluded that having cooperative agreements with our partners and being transparent in terms of our needs and funding allocations and resources, and it's very helpful to communicate with partners and increase the chance of receiving more funding. Obviously, cooperation with FHW as a big player is very important as well. We can actually increase that chance by having regular meetings and to have programs to raise grants and again, be as transparent as we can. There were a bunch of good comments, but all in all, we need to look for alternative sources, use possibly program multi-objective projects to reduce fixed costs such as mobilization, etc. And then Sylvia had great ideas about inflationary index. I can't even say it. So if there is time, she can, I'm pretty sure, elaborate more on it, but that's pretty much it.
Sorry, any comments on Dave's risk? Okay, I want to, before we jump over to Thomas, just to, maybe we can get some feedback in chat. We've got 3 to go and maybe a couple minutes on repeatedly damaged infrastructure. If everybody could hang on about 10 minutes, we could just knock this out today. Or alternatively, we could schedule some more time and come back and finish. Can I get like today or later in the chat so that I get an idea what everybody wants to do? Okay, seen a lot of todays, so I know there's a couple that there may be a conflicting meeting with, but let's press on and see where we are at 4 o'clock. But I'd be more inclined to just go for a couple extra minutes and just be done with the risk. So let's jump over to Thomas Schreiber. Thomas?
Yes, try and keep this short. I'm not going to display the screen. I'll just give some brief highlights. There were 4 of us in this breakout session, all from Caltrans headquarters. We were missing the local component to this. And risk statement, the accident reporting is not modernized. We may not accelerate some factors of safety improvements. We did change the word accident to crash because California Highway Patrol, who does the reports on the freeway system, refers to it as crash and not as accident. So to be consistent with them, we changed that statement. It was unanimous that we should treat, that the treatment actually depended a bit if it was state or local. On the state side, CHP has been modernizing the system for the past decade to the point where CHP now does all of their crash reports electronically, and the officers are doing them in the field with GPS. When they arrive, they tag what location it's actually at, and then they fill it in on an iPad or iPhone or some kind of small device in the film, and that ties into a statewide system they have. Also, that statewide system, they're starting to share it with some of the cities and counties who developed their own electronic crash systems, such as the city of Los Angeles, the county of Los Angeles. So some of the risk mitigation actions would be local agencies developing electronic reporting and then tying it into CHP's system where they transfer the data electronically, because CHP has a statewide system for all crashes in California, whether it's a county street, city road, or a state highway or freeway. And on the state side, there's a big IT project coming out where they've done linear referencing system for all roads in California, where they could tie in the crash data to that. That's called PSNR is the acronym. And so that was a lot of the discussion of those would be the two biggest efforts of how to treat this, so that ultimately when we would have timely crash data that's easy to sort through and query to find the information that's not so mappable, so easy to see on a map. And with that, I'll conclude my review.
Thank you, Thomas. Any other comments on getting more rapid safety information?
Scott Oak has raised his hand. Scott, you can unmute yourself.
It was an accident. I didn't raise my hand. Not sure why I raised the hand.
Okay, thank you, Scott. All right, let's, thank you, Thomas. Let's move over to Yue.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So our risk is the new defined risk number 6. So it's the statement is if funding in the highway bridge program continues at the same level for the foreseeable future, then necessary maintenance of bridges will be delayed, and the bridges in good repair could slide into fair and or poor condition. So we started with to see if this risk statement is appropriate, and the crisis of FHWA make a good point is say we probably should indicate NHS only. He mentioned that we don't have that so-called FHWA funding program anymore. So in terms of strategy, a general strategy for the risk mitigation, so we predominantly vote we should treat this or mitigate this risk. And for the risk mitigation actions, unfortunately, we don't have any local attendee in our session, but we have Chris from the FHWA, and we have 3 from our District 8. That's Catherine, Abbott, and Biharia. So in terms of risk mitigation actions, so generally we have 2 categories of actions. So one is to increase the pie, that means increase the funding, total funding, and also to prioritize the funding available. So or shift like between a different, funding programs. And increase, so probably mean do more education, so make the local agency more aware of the funding that are available for them to improve their their bridges. So another main category of action will be, so number 1 will be to change the maintenance strategy, maybe including more preventive and corrective kind of approach, and also enhance our approach to consider the life cycle cost, and probably maybe doing some kind of a policy change, maybe limiting some high cost products. And also Catherine and also Chris, we all mentioned that probably we provide some kind of innovative construction or delivery approaches, including bundle multiple products, so we have some kind of effective economy of scale. So for the risk owner, we all think, okay, the assets owner should be responsible for managing this risk, and also FHWA can assist on funding side or policy side. So we all think that our agency needed to need all this, like resource, expertise, organization support, and training, to manage this risk. And we think that this risk is high. We should take action, as soon as possible. So we also mentioned that okay, we need some local perspective, as well, for this risk. And now we are also only focused on NHS, but from the perspective of network connectivity, so we need to think more about non-NHS. So it looks like now we have more funding need for long NHS as well. So this is something that we should also think about that. So in terms of how we would move forward in your agency, I think we should treat this with high priority. So do you mean as good we can to move forward to treat this and or mitigate this risk? So that's including like a cross-agency and cross-function collaboration. We didn't talk too much about this, but based on the action we recommend is look like this one of the approach we should use. And lastly, how would we monitor this risk? So one is to monitor the funding level, and another one is to monitor the condition. I think we already have this kind of yearly kind of reporting requirement to FHWA. So that's already in place. Another one is to track the backlog. I mean, such as like the proposed versus funded projects, so we can know how many how many backlog we have and how this change. So that's all I have. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Yue. Any other comments from the broader group on the local bridge funding risk? On the positive side of things, there is some funding in the federal infrastructure package for this purpose. If it makes it through to approval, that would certainly help. Okay, thanks, Yue. Have all the moderators gone? Did I miss anybody? Sorry, I've been jumping around in my notes. Okay, that just leaves me, so I'll finish out. So first of all, the team, most important part, we had a really good team. And Nancy Lowe from SCAG, Abhijit Bagdi from Caltrans, Sam Mann from County of Fresno Public Works and Planning, and Brian Kim from the City of Carson. Our risk was related to climate change and the potential damage from not mitigating it. We did modify our risk statement a little bit. We took the phrase climate change out, replaced it with system resilience and extreme weather, and we even went on to define what that meant. And then also changed the then part of it to say our infrastructure could be damaged, could pose safety risks, and could cost more money. So there was a chat question in there about the need to digest all of this. You all are going to get all of these to kind of review together, but just know we did make some slight changes in the risk statement. In terms of the strategy, for the most part, we would treat, and when we treat, there is some taking advantage of making sure when we put it back, we're putting back maybe better condition infrastructure than we took out. As far as mitigation actions, generally it's harden the infrastructure, and there was really no difference on the state and local side. The issue was the funding to actually harden. So each asset owner would be responsible for hardening their own assets. So that would be cities and county owners as well as the state for state-owned infrastructure. We spent a good amount of time talking about what's needed. So from resources, money, and people. There was identification, the need for better state-local coordination. Transportation is a network, and if the state were to do something, but then the local roads flooded, it wouldn't really yield the benefit. So this coordination, particularly at a regional corridor level, is important. And then there was a recognition of the need for some cross-agency training, sharing of data, better understanding of condition assessments and treatment options. And this is particularly true when we get into like nature-based solutions for things like sea level rise. Would risk mitigation be a priority? I think everyone said yes. We thought at first maybe there'd be differences in how we would go about moving forward, but in the end, you know, there's a need to assess the vulnerabilities, then develop some sort of scoping plan for mitigation, secure the funding and technical assistance and project funding, then execute mitigation projects as funding allows. And then at the project level, I'm sorry, I think I lost this, but when we're doing project level work to kind of keep an eye on resiliency as well. So we want to start thinking a little bit about life cycle here and not go and, you know, rehabilitate a bridge only to come back 10 years later and have to tear it out and build it at a higher elevation. So this relationship between the asset condition and function and the need for it to be resilient needs to be part of the discussion. And then how would we monitor periodic reevaluations of the system for vulnerability, and then, you know, monitor what's already been mitigated. So that's kind of a summary of the climate risk. We did consolidate actually 2 different risk statements into this single risk statement, bringing in cost here as well. So any questions on the climate, extreme weather, sort of system resiliency risk? Okay, for those that have to leave, I apologize for the timing. I think we're going to just press on. We've got probably 5 more minutes. And but if you have to leave, we're going to send out all of these summaries, so you'll get another chance to kind of look at them at a more leisurely pace, and then get back any further comments to us. And then all of that will just lead to a draft TAMP, which you also get to review and comment on. So you got a couple more swings at this risk pitch. Okay, next slide. All right, Dawn, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Well, before I get started, I really just want to thank our facilitators and all of the attendees in these breakout sessions. I had to go first, and I'm telling you, I think I came in last in the presentation. You guys did an awesome job. I really appreciate you taking such thorough notes on this and really, you know, thinking about how to move forward with risks and the TAMP. I mean, amazing. That's all I can say. So moving on to assets repeatedly damaged. This one we talked about in day 1 as an overview, and I'm just going to restate what this is all about quickly. Basically, it's a separate analysis that we have to do for facilities damaged repeatedly due to declared emergency events. That means they have to be declared by the governor or the president. And what it means is that if we've had a location continually, time after time, getting damaged due to a major flood, an earthquake, or any of these things, we really need to start tracking that and make sure that we're, you know, having a process in place so that we can manage it, we can fix it appropriately, and so forth. So we use this also as a way to look at our risks in the TAMP. It actually is going to go beyond the TAMP for those of you who you're hearing this for the first time, but in our STIP process, there's going to be a whole thing that has to be developed for this evaluation as well. The TAMP is going to be very specific to National Highway System this go around. In our last TAMP, we only have the state highway system documented. So we summarize all of these locations on the NHS. We have to use reasonable efforts to obtain the data. And so our office in asset management looked at the emergency relief, federal emergency relief projects that received funding from 2006 to 2020 on both the state and local system. So we did look at these projects. On the state side, what did we do with it? Well, I can actually report out that we have taken some implementation steps with regards to funding in the shop. So in our latest 2021 State Highway System Management Planning Plan starting July 1st, we have a protective betterments program, which is looking at these locations and are identifying them as a basis for funding. So, you know, on the state side, we've actually taken some steps to try to mitigate this. On the local NHS, this is really our first time to look at these local ER funded projects and figure out if we do have locations that have had repeated damage. And we will be summarizing those and included in the TAMP. So I need your help. I will be sending out a request for information on the locations that we've identified, and you will be hearing from me shortly on this list for your confirmation. So we'll probably, because there's not too many of them, send them directly out to our local agencies for response. And with that, Mike, I'm turning it back to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank everyone. Just want to quickly review the action items. So we will be sending out the repeatedly damaged infrastructure 667 to cities and counties that own them and or MPOs. So we'll sort that part out. We'll also be sending out to everyone that attended the draft risk statement. So the sort of the compilation of everything we've talked about. So you get another chance if you want to comment on the draft statements. And then this information, along with the financial information and our inventory and condition, will come together in July for our workshop on investment strategies. So with that, I want to thank all of the moderators. Thanks to our Enterprise Risk Management Office for support here today, and all of you for attending and providing such valuable feedback. And hopefully we'll see you all in July for our next workshop on in the investment strategies. Thanks. Have a good evening.